This is the first ExpressLRS module to have two antennas on it. And in case you're sitting there going, big freaking deal, Bardwell, two antennas, what does that even mean? It is a big freaking deal, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. The specific module that we're looking at in today's video is the Beta FPV Super G. But I want to be clear that the technology we're talking about in this video, which the ExpressLRS devs call Gemini, that technology is not unique to Beta FPV or the Super G receiver. It just so happens that Beta FPV have been the first manufacturer to actually make a product containing this Gemini technology. So what is Gemini technology? You're probably familiar with the concept of antenna or radio diversity, where a given device will have two receive antennas, like, for example, your goggles, your FPV goggles, or the ExpressLRS receiver on your quad. They'll have two receiving antennas, and whichever of those antennas gets the strongest signal, that signal will get through to the receiver. So, for example, you could have one antenna on the front of your quad, one antenna on the rear of your quad, and then when your quad turns around to come home, you still have an antenna that is facing you and getting good signal. Sometimes people will orient those antennas at 90 degrees to each other, so they'll get polarization diversity. So if a signal comes in horizontally polarized, it hits one antenna. If it comes in vertically polarized, it hits the other antenna. You're probably familiar with the concept of diversity as a way of increasing the odds of getting a signal through. And that's kind of what Gemini does too, but I don't want you to mistakenly think that Gemini is just like receive diversity on a transmit module. It's definitely not. If we were to implement diversity on a transmitter module the same way that we implement it on a receiver, what would happen is that the exact same signal would be transmitted out of both antennas at the same time on the same frequency, and that would be bad. When you have two devices transmitting on the same frequency at the same time, that's called interference. That's why we don't do transmit diversity the same way we do receive diversity. Here's what Gemini is actually doing. Each of these antennas is wired to a separate ExpressLRS transmit chain, as if you had two separate transmit modules in the same little housing. And each of those modules is transmitting on a different ExpressLRS hopping pattern. I say hopping pattern because ExpressLRS uses LoRa technology, and LoRa is frequency hopping technology at its heart, where instead of transmitting on one frequency and staying there, which is very susceptible to interference, the way that LoRa works, very, very simply put, and probably inaccurately put, is that it hops around. And if there's interference over here, it hops over here randomly. It just pseudo-randomly hops around and tries to avoid interference. And that's one of the reasons why ExpressLRS and other technologies that use LoRa, including Crossfire and Ghost, are so resistant to interference. But they're not completely resistant to interference. They're still susceptible. If you are hopping around randomly and there's an interfering device over here, like a Wi-Fi access point, and you hop over here, for the time when you've hopped over here, your data is going to get corrupted. And then when you hop away, your data will come back. And that can result in interruptions in your control link, little micro dropouts and micro failsafes, or even in extreme cases, actual macro failsafes, if you want to call them that. And that's the problem that Gemini aims to solve. By having two separate transmitters going at the same time, you essentially have twice as many hops and twice as many chances to get the data through. So both of these antennas are transmitting the exact same data at the exact same time, but not on the exact same frequency. Instead of having one device hopping around randomly, you've got a second one, and they're both hopping around randomly. And so, at any given time, the odds of the packet that's being sent being somewhere where there isn't interference are twice as high. That's the essence of Gemini. In every other meaningful way, this is just a standard ExpressLRS module. Working with it is going to be exactly the same as any other ExpressLRS module. You will set the options, the transmit power, the switch mode, the packet rate, and so forth, the same as you always would. There's just going to be one additional set of options for the antenna transmission mode. And in order to show you that, let's go ahead and put this on one of my radios and start up the ExpressLRS Lua script. By the way, if you're not really familiar with ExpressLRS setup, settings, and modes, I'm going to put some links down in the video description below to a couple of videos that I think are a good introduction to the ExpressLRS system, just to kind of get you started. So those are down in the video description below. And here in the ExpressLRS Lua script, we can see an additional option here, antenna mode. The default is to have it in Gemini mode, which you would use only if you were using this with a Gemini receiver. If you were using this without a Gemini receiver, then we would switch that either to antenna 1, antenna 2. You could just choose, like theoretically, you could have different antennas on each one if you wanted to. You'll choose antenna 1, antenna 2, or switch mode. And basically what that will do is it will alternate between them to see maybe if that will help in some way. The antenna mode option that we've been looking at so far controls how the module uses its antennas. But there are also options to configure how the receiver functions, and I want to show you that now. That's going to be here all the way at the bottom of the Lua script. There is an additional section called Other Devices. And if you go into Other Devices, you have the option there to work with the receiver options. And if we go in there, we can see, we can change, interesting, we can change the protocol that the receiver outputs. Wow, in the Lua script even. You don't have to refresh it. I didn't even know that was there. Okay, that's not the point of this video. The receiver mode can be changed from diversity to Gemini. And if you don't do that, you're not in Gemini mode, no matter what you've done to your module. So I want you to know these options are here because there are going to be people out there who are going to test this and not actually know that they need to do this. And the whole time they're testing it, they're not going to be in Gemini mode. I would have been one of them, except I was bitching to an ExpressLRS dev about this. And fortunately, we got to talking about it, and I wanted to make sure I understood all these things. And he told me these things. So thank you to Captain Bry for making sure I had these details correct. Well, don't forget that we still have two antennas, and we can take advantage of antenna diversity just like we normally would. Forget about this antenna. This is for the internal module. So if we have the Gemini module being used with a non-Gemini receiver, we could take these two antennas and orient them 90 degrees to each other, or we could orient them, I guess we have to do it like that, because otherwise they're going to get in the way up here. We could orient them 90 degrees to each other to increase the chances of a packet getting through due to polarization diversity. We could orient them like so. Oh, that would be really good. So that we've got one antenna pointing straight out, so its null is out here, and one antenna pointing to the side, so its null is here, and they'll cover each other's nulls. There are still advantages to using the Gemini module, even if you're not using a Gemini receiver. You're just not getting the most possible advantage. Now, if you're thinking that it's super annoying to have to switch antenna mode depending on which model you have, like if some of your quads have a Gemini receiver and other ones don't, if you're thinking that's super annoying to have to switch that setting manually, the good news is you don't technically have to. If you decide to use ExpressLRS's model match function, then the module and radio can automatically change that setting based on which receiver the radio is bound to at any given moment. That's fairly complicated to set up and kind of confusing. I, of course, have a tutorial about how to do it, and I will link it in the video description below if you'd like to check it out. Bear in mind that anytime you are in Gemini antenna mode, you are essentially doubling the power draw of the module. Both of these antennas are capable of outputting 1 watt of output power. And when you're switching between them or using one at a time, then you're just basically outputting 1 watt. You're drawing how much ever power that draws. But if you are using Gemini mode, both of them are transmitting 1 watt at the same time, and essentially you're drawing twice as much power, and that's going to maybe noticeably shorten your battery life. Also, depending on which radio you're using, some radios don't have enough power, the ability to supply enough power to the module bay to support higher powered modules like this. Does it have an external? Doesn't have an external power slot, although it does have, shut up. It does come with a frickin' XT30 to USB connector, I see no way that this could possibly cause a problem. I'm gonna guess that you use that with an external battery and don't use it with anything else, because you'll frickin', like, I'm half tempted to plug this into some USB device I don't care about and see if it fries. Okay, so that's how you would do external power if your module if your radio couldn't supply power to the module. Oh, Beta FPV, never change. At this point in the video, you might be thinking, that's cool, but Beta FPV has in the past released hardware, ExpressLRS hardware, without the participation of the ExpressLRS devs. And it has resulted in cases where you can't flash the Beta FPV module or the Beta FPV receiver or whatever with the standard ExpressLRS tools. You have to get the firmware from Beta FPV, or sometimes there are bugs that if the ExpressLRS devs had helped to check the hardware before it was released, the bugs would have been caught. I'm happy to say my first action when Beta FPV reached out to me about this product was to contact one of the ExpressLRS devs and say, hey, are they working with you on this, or are they just cowboying it up? And he said, no, they're working with us. This is actually hand in hand. This hardware has the blessing of the ExpressLRS project, for as much as that means. Does it mean it's perfect? It's new hardware. It's hardware from Beta FPV. We could be surprised, but it's better than the alternative. Now it's time to take the Gemini module out and see what kind of a difference it can make in my flight performance. If you're noticing that my lips aren't lining up with the words that you're hearing, that's because the original audio from this segment was corrupted and I had to re-record it. So apologies for that, but we'll get through this. I've got 3 metrics in my on-screen display that relate to how good of a signal I'm getting. They are the signal-to-noise ratio, the link quality, and the RSSI dBm. And of these 3, the link quality is the one that we're going to pay the most attention to, because the Gemini module isn't going to make the signal more powerful, and nor is it going to make the receiver more sensitive, and that would affect the RSSI dBm or the signal-to-noise ratio. It is only going to affect the percentage of packets that actually get through, and that's the link quality. One of the problems we're going to have to deal with in this test is that ExpressLRS has exceptionally good range. So you're actually not going to notice the effect of this system very much under a lot of conditions. You're just going to have great signal, and it's going to be great no matter what you do. And the FAA doesn't want me to fly beyond visual line of sight. So in order to make this experiment work, we're going to have to stack the deck against ExpressLRS as much as we can. You'll see on my on-screen display that the ExpressLRS module is only outputting 25 milliwatts, the minimum possible output power, and I have set the packet rate to the highest possible packet rate, F1000. That gives incredibly low latency, but also has the shortest range of any ExpressLRS system. So if you watch this video and you go, damn, I thought ExpressLRS was supposed to have great range, that's because I have intentionally made the range as short as possible just so I can do this test at all without getting in trouble with the FAA. And we're going to do this first test with the transmitter using only a single antenna, as if it was a non-Gemini transmitter. The receiver is a Beta FPV Super D receiver. It is a full diversity receiver. It turns out that any ExpressLRS full diversity receiver can also operate in Gemini mode as long as they're on ExpressLRS 3.2 or newer. They have all the hardware they need to do Gemini. They just need the firmware to unlock it. But for this test, we've got a single transmitter and a diversity receiver as a baseline, just a standard ExpressLRS setup. And what I need to do is I need to get the link quality to drop. As long as the LQ is 100, then 100% of the packets are getting through, and the Gemini system retransmitting packets just wouldn't be doing anything beneficial. It would be just wasting energy and transmitting packets twice when they were all perfectly getting through. So we're going to fly down the road here, and we're going to start looking for the first point where the LQ really starts to drop. LQ around 100, 98, 95 is no big deal. Once it gets down into the 80s, or God forbid below about 80, is where I personally start to think, oh, that's kind of iffy. And right as we pass this first mailbox here, we're going to see the LQ takes its first serious nosedive. There it was, LQ of 61. If I keep pushing, I'm going to see that only get worse. That's going to be our baseline performance for the single antenna with a diversity receiver. Now let's put the module into switch mode, and that is going to cause it to transmit alternately on the two antennas. And I've got the antennas in a 90-degree orientation to try to take some advantage of transmit diversity. Let's see if things get any better. They're only going to get better if I was on the null of one antenna at the point where I flew down the road. Basically, if I was on the strong part of the antenna already, then adding a second antenna in a different orientation isn't going to improve things. But if I happen to have been on a weak part of the first antenna, adding a second antenna in a 90-degree orientation could help cover that gap and provide better signal quality. Let's take a look at the LQ as I come down the road and approach this first mailbox. Right past this mailbox was where we first saw the signal start to drop. Let's just feel it out. 88, 98, 95, 97. It does seem more solid here, doesn't it? It doesn't seem like I'm seeing those dips down into the 80s or even the 60s. We're really holding in the 90s. So this is a case where we could probably conclude that adding a second antenna and switching between them is improving things for us. That's really exciting. Let's see how far I can go. I'm just going to push it out slowly here because I don't want to fail safe. Yeah, 89, 97, 100. We're getting much further. We haven't seen even a single dip down into the 60s, not that I've seen as I'm sitting here recording this. Even this, keep in mind, this would work even with a standard non-diversity receiver. Oh, there we go. We saw 70. Now it's starting to drop. This would work with even a standard non-diversity receiver. This benefit could be gained simply by getting a Gemini module and putting it in switch mode and having just a little bit of antenna diversity, polarization diversity by having cross-polarized antennas. Very exciting. And now finally, we will have Gemini mode. Both the transmitter and the receiver are in Gemini mode. Remember, you have to switch the receiver and the transmitter in the Lua script. Keep an eye out for anybody who does a video where they don't change the receiver and their receiver's in diversity mode. They're not actually using Gemini mode. If I knew who was doing it, I'd call them and warn them. But I'm sure that some creators are going to make this mistake, and I'm very thankful to Captain Bri for helping me not be one of them. Yeah, for once I did my research. No, I always do research. What are you talking about? Anyway, what were we talking about? The link quality. The link quality is holding at 100. Let's fast forward to the mailbox. Okay, here we go. Passing the first mailbox. Link quality is holding in the high 80s. I saw an 82 there, an 86, a 92, 85. Still holding in there. Really perfectly acceptable LQ. No dips. The big question, I guess, would be, are we doing significantly better than we were doing with just antenna switching? And I'm not sure about that. That's a hard one to call. Feels like maybe here at the very, very end of the road, the signal is holding in just a little more stably. But it's a subtle difference and would require some real statistical analysis to say for sure.
Before I sum up my impressions of this module, I need to give you guys a little bit of a caveat, and that is that these impressions are very preliminary. I haven't got hours and hours of flying on this module under lots and lots of different conditions. And specifically, it would be really valuable to fly this module in a very, very noisy environment, like fly it at a concert where there's hundreds or thousands of cell phones all blasting 2.4 gigahertz. That's when I think you really are going to see the benefit of something like this. Nevertheless, I think that there are some conclusions we can come to. And the main conclusion that I've come to after this admittedly preliminary testing is that the Gemini system does provide some benefit. It may only be a relatively small benefit in terms of having more consistent signal quality as you approach the edge of range. It's not a night and day difference. It's not going to extend your usable range by 50% or more, but it does provide more consistent packet rates at the edge of range. And that is especially relevant if you like using the very, very high Express LRS packet rates like F1000. Those packet rates give you the lowest possible latency, but they also have very poor sensitivity. Those packets are going to be more easily corrupted by interference or just being at distance, and the Gemini system transmitting those packets twice provides a pronounced advantage. For people who fly at 50 hertz, you're still going to see, presumably, some advantage as you get to the edge of range. But the difference is going to be that at 50 hertz and 1 watt of output power, your edge of range is so freaking far out that you're not going to really experience situations where you need the benefit of the Gemini system. And keep in mind that the whole time you're using Gemini mode, you are doubling the power draw of the module, and that's going to suck your battery down faster. If the main concern that we have is the occlusion of an antenna. For example, I have the antenna mounted at the back of the quad and I'm flying out, and then when I turn around to come home, the antenna is maybe occluded by the battery up on top. It's blocking the signal. We've all had that experience where when you turn around to come home, you get maybe fail-safe or reduction in link quality. If that was my main concern, then I would be mostly worried about diversity, and I would mount one antenna on the front and one antenna on the rear. And in that situation, I wouldn't be getting as much benefit from the Gemini system because at any given time, one antenna would clearly be the best one and one antenna would clearly be the worst one. And so one of those transmissions would pretty much always be sort of wasted. Obviously, that's not going to be universally true. There are going to be times when maybe I'm flying sideways and both the rear and the front antenna are equally beneficial, and then the Gemini system is going to really show its benefit. But if you really want to take the best advantage of the Gemini system, you're going to want to mount your antennas so that both of the antennas are seeing the signal from both of the transmitters as much as possible. It may be beneficial to have those antennas at 90 degrees to each other and then take the antennas on your transmitter and put them at 90 degrees to each other. And that way you'll get a little bit of polarization diversity. But if the mounting of your antennas only lets one of them see the signal at a time, the benefit of Gemini is going to be wasted. If you're interested in picking up this specific Gemini module, there are links in the video description below, and they are affiliate links, and that means that if you make any purchase after you click that link, then I get a small commission on anything you buy. It's an easy way for you to support the channel. If you haven't decided to join my Patreon yet, because you're just not quite there, I get that. The simple thing you can do is find an affiliate link. Heck, you can even bookmark the affiliate link. Click the affiliate link, do your shopping, and check out. I get a little commission. It does add up. Despite the fact that this is a Beta FPV module, and in the past, Beta FPV has had some issues with their Express LRS hardware. I'm not going to go into details. Let's take it on a fresh foot. This module has been developed in participation with the Express LRS devs, and although that is not a 100% guarantee of quality, it certainly avoids some pitfalls that you could run into. Like, you could be reasonably confident, you can be confident that the target for this module will be supported in the Express LRS configurator, and there aren't certain obvious and dumb mistakes made in its manufacturing. In fact, one of the reasons these Gemini modules have been delayed so long, because this was introduced months ago, maybe as much as almost a year ago, one of the devs demoed this. One of the reasons they've been delayed is that there have been lots of little technical problems with having two transmitters on one board, and the devs have been working with the manufacturers to figure that out. So there should be some amount of confidence that this is not just like a half-baked product that the Beta FPV is sort of throwing out there. Then again, some people would prefer to wait for like a Radio Master version. Okay, I'm just saying. Thank you, Beta FPV, for sending this to me, though. I gotta tell it like I see it. This whole video is focusing on the idea of link quality and failsafe. And if you fly Express LRS and you don't fully understand how link quality and failsafe and RSSI and signal to noise ratio works, I'm going to put a couple videos on screen. There's cards on screen to these videos and links in the video description below, and they will help you understand when you're about to fail safe and what you can do to better know and predict whether it's safe for you to keep flying or whether you need to turn around and come home. I'll see you there.